I think you can get him.
Okay. It takes. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our GAE Facebook Live. I am Lisa Morgan, a kindergarten teacher and president of GAE.
And I'm Carly Shaw. I'm a 8th grade physical science teacher in Fulton County and the secretary treasurer of GAE.
And I'm Joe Fleming, legislative representative for the association.
And our special guest this evening is State Senator and Dr. Michelle Ah. Welcome to GAE's Facebook Live.
Thank you so much for having me back, guys. It's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again, too. And just to let everyone know, our Vice President Sharon Doe is actually at a local meeting this evening. So that's why she is not with us. But we were talking about this time last year. We're still there. We are still in a pandemic. So I spent the month of July all around the state. Carly was out. Joe was out. Unfortunately, we did not see a lot of the strategies we've been talking about since the beginning to stop the spread of COVID-19. Lots and lots of places that nobody was wearing masks, not a lot of social distancing. And unfortunately, now it seems like we're seeing that with the increasing cases and especially the increase in the number of children. So do we have another option other than everybody shutting everything back down? What do we need to do to help fix this?
Great. And I think that's the question that's foremost on everyone's mind right now, is because we are obviously at this place where we're at an interface where schools just restarted here in the state of Georgia. Most schools have been open for about 1 or 2 weeks at this point, right? And we're also at a point where our case numbers, especially with this Delta variant that we've been talking more and more about, are really on the steep uptick. So these two things are intersecting on our timeline. So we really have to take a good hard look at not just what our goals are in getting our kids back to school, but also how we aim to reach those goals, right? So I'm just going to go through some basic things. We're not going to get too much into like the statistics and the numbers. I think you can get that from a lot of people and places. What I want to talk about is just like basic broad stroke ideas and sort of strategies that I would like us all to start thinking about more practically in terms of our reintegration into school and in terms of getting our kids back in the classrooms. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Michelle Au. I'm a physician here in Metro Atlanta. I'm also the state senator for Georgia's 48th district. It covers North Fulton and Gwinnett counties. And relevant to this forum, especially, I am a mom. I have 3 kids. All my kids attend Fulton County schools. I have a kid in high school, middle school, and elementary school. So I do have a lot of skin in the game, and I've been watching very closely, not just what my schools are doing, but what schools around the state have been doing with respect to their pandemic mitigation strategies. So today I want to just give a brief update about our COVID perspective here in Georgia. And again, talk about thoughts on COVID mitigation, particularly within the school system, and what are some good next steps. I don't need to tell anyone, obviously, who's been paying attention that we are in the middle of this significant surge, largely due to the predominance of this highly contagious Delta variant. Dr. Kathleen Toomey just had a press conference with Governor Kemp, I believe it was yesterday, or maybe it was the day before. And she stated, I believe, that about 90% of our cases are Delta, which is about what we've been seeing around the country. That's something new that we didn't see last school year when we were having these same conversations, right? It feels like Groundhog Day, like keep talking about the same things and it seems like it gets better and then it's getting worse again. So we're seeing explosive case growth. As of yesterday, which were the numbers I last checked before I got on here, it's almost 7,500 new daily cases. And some of the steepest increases we've seen in our youngest age groups, which is ages 0 to 17 years old, which are kids in our K through 12 system. What we're also seeing, just from the other side of it, is that this is putting us in a situation where our healthcare system is really being pushed to the brink, with hospitals in many parts of Georgia nearing or surpassing capacity, especially in our intensive care units and especially in the Metro Atlanta area, especially outside the Metro Atlanta area, I'm sorry. So what this means, of course, just to put it in practical terms, what this means for people who are outside the hospital is not just that hospitals might come to the point where we run out of room to accommodate COVID patients. Hospitals might also run out of room to accommodate other patients having non-COVID-like emergencies, including things like heart attacks, strokes, injuries, or cancer, things that we still need to have dealt with and are still happening even in the backdrop of COVID. So let's talk about what this looks like from the perspective of our schools. So after about a year and a half, right, pretty much everyone agrees about the really critical, vital importance of getting kids back to consistent in-person school, period. I think we all understand the importance of that, especially having had the experience that we had last year and sort of half the year before that experience for our kids. And this approach of prioritizing kids being back in person is what the CDC is prioritizing. It's what the American Academy of Pediatrics is strongly pushing. And this is what kids and parents and teachers and administrators want for our children also, right? We want our kids to get back to something sort of close to normal. We all want to get back to normal and be back to school learning in person. But like we were saying before, there's still a gap in our planning, right? Because it's not enough just to set a goal and say, we all need to get back in person and then just do it, right? The more important thing is the plan you make on how to reach that goal. So how have our plans been in working to keep our kids in school, not just to send them back, but keep them there about 2 weeks now into the school year? And I want to hear actually more from you all about how it's been going on the ground in our school buildings. But across the state, our plan has been pretty hodgepodge. It's been pretty fragmented across different school systems, across different areas. And our results, as we were discussing, have not really been that great, right? You all probably saw that there was a piece in the AJC earlier this week. And in this AJC article, they noted that 14 school districts across Metro Atlanta recorded nearly 4,000 cases of coronavirus as of the end of last week. In its school system. And really within just days of reopening classrooms, school districts in at least 9 Georgia counties already had to shift back to virtual learning due to COVID-19 outbreaks in students and in staff, right? In being unable to run the classrooms as they had planned to. And at least 2 other counties delaying the opening of school because of COVID. So across school districts, we know, I don't want to belabor the points too much because we all sort of know what we're supposed to be doing, right? We know what the points are and we know what the tools in our toolbox are. But across school systems, the approach to encouraging vaccination, the approach to universal masking, lunchroom policies, contact tracing and quarantine, these approaches have all been very mixed and have produced predictably pretty mixed results and frankly, a lot of confusion from parents. And I get a lot of emails from people or just people sidelining me being like, what is going on? Because like these guidelines keep changing day to day and people are becoming very frustrated with the level of guidance and what to expect. The good thing, it's concentrated a good thing about this school year versus last year is that we actually know much more about COVID now than we did back then, the last time we met and we're talking about, same stuff. The other good thing is that we have more tools in our toolkit, as I noted, than we used to. So let's talk about the ways that we can employ these tools in the school setting in particular, and the ways that we can use these tools to meet the goals that we've set, which is to have as close as possible to a full in-person school year for our students. So the newest thing, the thing that we didn't get to talk about last time we met is the sharpest tool in our toolkit right now, which is vaccination, right? Vaccination, as we know, is the best protection against COVID-19 that we have right now. It's like It's like an N95 mask that you get to wear on the inside, right? It's a biological N95 mask that you don't have to take off to eat in the lunchroom, that you don't forget in your car, that you don't put on wrong, and that no one can see, right? It doesn't block anything. So obviously the goal would be, ideally in some perfect world, that everyone would get vaccinated and this would be over. But there are obviously some significant gaps to our coverage in the school system in particular. So the first is, obviously, as of this point, no one younger than the age of 12 is eligible to be vaccinated against COVID-19. And I'm well aware of this in a family with a 16-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 9-year-old, that some kids can get vaccinated and some kids cannot, right? I'm hoping this will change very soon with this upcoming fall, in terms of hopefully expanding to the next age group, which will probably be like the 5 to 11 age group, and at least get most of the elementary school age kids, like K, kindergarten and up. But until then, the safest way to protect our unvaccinated children is to really surround them with a ring of vaccinated people, be it family or friends or the adults that take care of them during the day. And obviously, if you have kids that are 12 or over, like my middle school and high school kids, that to get them vaccinated is going to be a hugely important step. Georgia is really sorely lacking in our youth vaccination rates in particular, and not just in the younger kids, 12 to 16, but also in, you know, our older college students, teenagers, people up to their 20s and 30s, because every health decision feels like a cost benefit analysis. And I think that for a long time, we've gotten that message that younger, healthier people don't need to worry as much about COVID, right? So they feel, well, the cost of getting vaccinated is XYZ. And the benefit is feels minimal because I'm not going to get that sick anyway. You know, this is something that we've, you know, unfortunately learned over time. We know that this pandemic is changing, this disease is changing, this virus is changing. So those things are not always true anymore. So pushing that younger vaccination age group is going to be really important. But another barrier we see, other than younger kids not being able to be vaccinated, is that not everyone who's eligible for vaccination is vaccinated yet. And this is something we can work on together as we're waiting for these younger kids to become available. Now, in the course of my regular job, which is not just in the state Senate, but at the hospital talking with patients, I talk to many patients. Actually, most of the patients I talk to are vaccinated. And I think that's a little bit of a sampling error because I work in the operating room. So a lot of those patients are sicker and had to pass through more of the healthcare system to get to me. So many of them have been sort of convinced already to become vaccinated. But I do meet many patients, often younger, who aren't vaccinated. And I always ask them in a very non-judgmental way, why? Because I want to understand why, so that we can target our communication and our outreach better to reach these folks, right? And some of you folks might not be vaccinated either. And it's not something, I understand the reasons that people weigh these costs and benefits the way they do, but maybe this is something we can also talk about at the end of this forum if people have questions, that we can help reassure people or talk about some of the things that people have read that make them apprehensive about the vaccine. The most common reason I hear from my patients, who are all very reasonable and make very good health choices, most of what I hear is that they feel the vaccine was developed too quickly or is too new, and they, you know, want to make careful, reasoned healthcare decisions, and they kind of feel like they want to wait and see. And we can talk a little bit about that reasoning and whether or not the vaccine is new or not. Also, I hear a lot from young women, this misapprehension, which is not true, but we can talk about it some more, that the COVID vaccine could affect fertility or pregnancy. And that's something I hear very commonly from some of even like nurses I work with, definitely young female patients. So we can talk about that too if people have questions. But I just want to put forth, if it makes people feel better, that not only have I personally chosen to vaccinate my 12-year-old and 16-year-old, so not just myself, but my kids. But when my 9-year-old is eligible, I'm going to take her to get vaccinated too. So just to show that the confidence I have, because it's not, you know, I'm taking my kids in, I'm making that choice because I feel that it's the benefits outweigh the risk. Speaking of vulnerable people, and speaking to the fact that kids 12 and under still can't get vaccinated, we have to add another layer, right? Because these kids are uniquely exposed in a way that we as adults who can get vaccinated are not. So let's add another layer of protection to keep them safe. Again, this has been something we've been talking about for more than a year, right? It's an issue that's become even more politicized than it was before, right? And we can talk about that because I'd like to hear what you all are hearing in your communities and in your classrooms. But obviously this layer is a strategy of universal masking indoors. And this is per the recommendations of the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics. Anyone in K through 12 school, regardless of vaccination status, should be wearing a mask indoors. And just the way to think about it, because I know that a lot of people come at it from the viewpoint of that parents should get to choose, what their kids do and that sort of thing. But because elementary school age kids can't get vaccinated yet, we need to give them a little extra protection, right? And I'm just going to make it an analogy because sometimes I think this makes it easier for people to understand and for you to convey to your families also that you interface with at school. Just like how a toddler, when they're in your car, isn't old enough to sit in the front seat, isn't old enough to wear a standard seatbelt, and isn't old enough to be protected by the airbag, right? We do a little extra for younger kids to protect them and to protect the vulnerable. Like we put infants rear facing, we put them in car seats and later on in booster seats until they're old enough to be protected the same way that we get to be, right? So I like to think of it in that same way. People often cite the statistics that are, misleading in the sense that it doesn't give the focus on what we should also be worrying about when it comes to societal cost of kids getting COVID. But they cite the low fatality rate in kids of COVID. That, only such a small % of kids die from COVID. So why should we all be freaking out and making everyone wear a mask, right? Back to the same analogy about cars. In 2018, only about 0.001% of US kids younger than 12 were killed in car crashes. But it is the law that kids have to use car seats and seatbelts and all those things we talked about because it's understood that avoidable death and injury, especially in children, is worth the effort to overcome. So, when we compare it to other things, it would be ridiculous for people to suggest, well, only this many kids die in car accidents, so why should it be the law that they have to sit in car seats, right? It's the same sort of reasoning, and I think we just have to get past the fact that the masks are politicized and just think of it like any other public health issue. Finally, all of us here in Georgia, but especially in the school setting, really need to be doing more surveillance testing for COVID, right? We need to be testing even on a routine basis to be catching these infections earlier and getting a better sense of local case numbers, spread, and who the close contacts are, right? Our state percent positivity rate over the last 2 weeks is extremely high, which shows that not only do we have a lot of cases, but also that we're not testing enough, right? And I think that a regular surveillance system of unvaccinated individuals being tested twice a week, for example, could be key in catching new cases early before they have too much chance to spread, right? Because if we wait until someone's symptomatic, it's already been potentially spreading for a couple of days. I'm just going to show you one thing. I ran up to get this visual aid. I'm just going to show you. This is one thing. I'm not endorsing this product at all, right? I don't have any stock in it, but this is something I bought before my kids restarted school. It's a home testing kit. It is FDA approved under an EUA. There's 2 tests. It's a home test for COVID. And I was thinking that I would just start to do it maybe at home for surveillance, just regardless of being told that my kids have a close exposure, but just to have a better sense of surveillance, really. So we get a sense of what's going around and to not send a sick kid to school, even if they're not showing symptoms, It's not a perfect solution because I will tell you that this thing is kind of expensive. It is 2 tests. They recommend you that if you are exposed to test both 3 and 5 days after the close exposure to get the maximum amount of sensitivity and specificity in this test. But this kit is $25, which is not a little bit of money, especially if you're talking about doing it every week.
Senator, where can our listeners find something like that?
I got this on Amazon, and there are a couple of home test kits that are available. There's one from Binax. This one is from Quidel. If you just go on to, I'm not endorsing Amazon, but I'm saying go onto your preferred home shopping site, Google COVID home test. There are certain ones, I would double check though that they are FDA approved for EUA because I don't want people to buy just junk out there that's not been verified by the FDA. This particular, and again, I'm not endorsing this pumpkin in particular, but I did do the research in this one. And if anyone wants, I actually have the FDA approval sort of literature because I want to read it and I want to read what the sensitivity was. It's not obviously as good as if you go to get a PCR test at a real lab, but if my kid was sick, I would probably take them to get the real test, but for a matter of surveillance or something like that, and not having to drive your kid to get tested, this is a fine option that I have around now because of this, concern about kids being in school with Delta raging through everything, right? When it comes to the issue of testing, we are not anywhere close to talking about that in terms of like uniform surveillance in the state of Georgia, like we've seen in some other countries when kids went back to school, especially last year, that they did have a uniform testing policy in some other foreign countries. But for any legislators who argue that the process of having to test twice a week is like so onerous, I would remind them that this is precisely the model that the Georgia General Assembly used when we were all in session this year at the Capitol. We all had mandatory testing of all members, all senators and House reps twice a week. This is also the model that they used in the Georgia Governor's Honors Program this past year, which, as many of you knew because you're educators, is a residential academic program that was this year at Berry College in Georgia. And students at that time had to either provide proof of vaccination, which many kids were because they were mostly 16 and up, or be tested twice a week. And this was a fine system, and it really maximized the layers of safety for students. They also had mandatory indoor masking. And I think it worked very well. You know, it's just one layer on another. No one strategy is going to catch everything. No one strategy is going to prevent everything. But having a couple different strategies layered on top of each other is the best way that we're going to get through this. So just in closing, before we talk about whatever you guys want to chat about, the primary thing I think that we lose sight of when we are in this very charged environment that is unfortunately political, even though I don't view this at all as a political issue, is that we are all on the same side of this issue. We all agree that kids are served best under ideal circumstances when learning in person, in classrooms with their friends and with their teachers, right? We agree that our goals as leaders and as educators is to serve and to protect our kids, right? That's the job we do every day. And we agree that preventable harm and injury to our kids is worth working towards because it's literally what we were hired and asked to do. So with that framing, you know, some of the more contentious issues are still going to remain, but I think that it does good to remind people of that to start, including parents or community members who don't always agree with us on our methods. So with that, I'm just going to close up. I don't want to be just yakking all the time, and I'd love to talk more about any questions you guys have.
I think one of the things that I want to say, and I've said this all year, I said this to a superintendent last year when we were talking about mandatory masks, and I got the comment, well, kids don't die from this. And I said then, and I will say it today and I will say it forever, you're saying if it's only one child, you hear that, only one child. But to that child's family and friends, it's the only one child. And it's a big difference. And I think we need to look at all of our children that way, that, you know, we are protecting all of our children as if we would protect our own child. And I think that's part of what baffles me in this, how we have parents that in 99% of circumstances would do everything they can to protect their child. But in this instance, they've allowed the one thing that can protect their children to become something that they're arguing against.
I'd love to hear more about what you're hearing from your communities and the families in your school about the masking issue. I've obviously watched some school board meetings and read, you know, even around the country, people's objections. What are you all hearing as the primary 2, 3 objections? Aside from individual freedom,
that's all I'm hearing is the freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And
I heard carbon dioxide they're breathing in carbon dioxide, and that people can't breathe properly with the mask on, and that it's breaking out their face. They're getting some type of breakout because they're breathing in. They're exhaling and then breathing that back in. I was at the last board meeting for our county, and it was very interesting. There was a large group of parents there that were against the mask mandate. They said things like our child, our decision. um, they yelled something, not fear. So they were saying that the reason why we're having to wear masks is because people are afraid. And some of the people that spoke don't believe that COVID is a real thing.
Yeah.
And that was very eye-opening, that there are still people out there that don't believe COVID is real.
Yeah.
I was a little shocked.
It is hard. And, sentiment and emotions get so high that it's almost
Yes.
difficult to communicate across these barriers. And you're sensitive to that, right? Because we're all
Right.
trying to do what's best for our kids, right? So I really don't like to, we've seen a lot of people communicate about this in a lot of different ways. I try to have a lot of empathy for people and the reasons that they come forth with the reason they do, because they don't think they're hurting their kids. They don't think they're
Right.
hurting other people, right? They're trying to do what they think is right. What I will often say about the freedom issue, and I often use metaphors because it makes it a little easier for people to understand when we take it out of this arena, right? Because I think we're so locked into how we think about this. We talk about personal freedoms, and people can exercise their personal freedoms, right? Like, no one's saying you have to wear a mask in your own house. No one's saying you have to wear a mask outdoors at this moment, unless if you're not in a big crowd. The same way that people are allowed to drink alcohol, people are allowed to get drunk, right? But people aren't allowed to drive drunk, right? And there's a difference in that. You have the freedom to get drunk, but you don't have the right to drive drunk. That's against the law. And the reason is because when you do that, you're taking away other people's freedom to be healthy and safe and live the lives that they want to lead, right? So what I try to do that, just to take that freedom argument, which obviously is very important for a lot of people, and to respect that argument, but also have them see it from the other side, is like, well, what about other people's freedom to send their kid who may be asthmatic or immunocompromised? Does that kid not have the right to be safe and go to school? We have in schools a lot nut-free zones, right? Because we have a lot of kids who are allergic to peanuts, and we'll have nut-free classrooms or nut-free tables, or even certain schools that are completely nut-free, right? Because they have so many kids who are allergic. And you could be that parent who's like, well, my freedom, I should be the one deciding if I send my kid to school with a peanut butter and jelly, not you. You don't get to tell me that, right? And there might be parents who say that. But I think when we frame it that way, people understand that sometimes we make these decisions to protect other people also. And it doesn't mean that you can't eat your PB&J at home, right? No one's saying we ban peanut butter forever, right? But that we choose our freedoms based on other people's freedoms as well. That's how I try to frame it. I try to make it into like a school or kid or parent type analogy. So I don't know if that'll help you when we have these conversations with our parents. There was one other thing you said. The carbon dioxide. I've heard that too, that people say, kids can't breathe well with masks on. They're not getting enough oxygen. There's too much carbon dioxide. And I try to explain this away that's not, because I don't want to be like, look, I try not to be snide about it, but we point out that obviously the size of molecules, and I'm sure there are science teachers who are on this call as well.
Yeah, we always have a science teacher.
The size of an oxygen molecule or the size of a carbon dioxide molecule is really very small, right? So, so the idea that these cannot pass freely through something like a paper mask or a cloth mask is, not totally logical, but I understand. And I try to sympathize, like, that it's not always that comfortable. And I always say, like, I have to wear a mask at my work even before this all the time. And sometimes my face will break out too, especially if I wear a tighter fitting mask, like in our day of the N95, especially where it's a very tight fitting mask that you keep on for long periods of time. Yeah, I totally get it. I would get, mask knee, as people charmingly call it, or it becomes hot if you're like walking up a bunch of flight of stairs. So I get it, so to be able to sympathize, like, I know it's not my favorite either, but to get past the sense of immediate danger that the mask is hurting the child, or that the child can't talk with the mask on, or that they can't hear a teacher speaking with a mask on. And I just, that critical information can't be conveyed. And I try to tell people in a nice way, that when we're in the operating room and we all have to wear masks, right? Because you don't want us to be infecting you when your guts are open, that we're conveying very critical, time-sensitive information all the time. And we have not had a problem, even in our days of the double masks now, wearing 2 masks that we can hear each other quite well. It's not ideal. Like, I get it. I have a lot of sympathy for people who don't want their kids to be wearing masks all the time. And hopefully this won't be forever. But in order to get through it, we do have to, you know, layer on these protections so we can get past it and get back to normal, right? There was one other thing you said about the objections that I can't remember now. If it comes up again, or if you remember.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a thing that came up, but anyway, I don't know if that's helpful. That's how I try to approach it. And I feel like people at this point are very allergic to this sense that they're being lectured, because I do think that especially social media and how we talk past each other promotes this sensibility of like, I can't believe you're so dumb. How can you not know this? You're stupid if you don't do this. And it's not helpful. I don't think that's a constructive way to talk about something so important. I think it makes people shut off. It certainly doesn't get us on the same side, right? I think we have to realize that we are on the same side, and our goal, we're on one side and COVID's on the other side, right? So instead of acting like we're fighting each other, to be like, look, what are our goals? Our goals, everyone's goal is to get their kids back in person and to stay there, right? How do we get there? What is the best way to do that? Let's work together on that. And that, I think, helps a little bit more than being like, don't you know that oxygen is a small molecule, you know, because people are like, don't patronize me, you know, because people have good reasons for doing and not doing the things they do. Belligerence is never helpful. So some of those school board meetings do get a little heated, and that's on either side not helpful, I think. But you guys have probably seen that a lot. A little bit.
One of the people that's watching said this, and I think this is not uncommon, that in a friend works in a nearby school system to Athens, and nothing has been discussed since April about the pandemic precautions, vaccination, and exactly 2 adults are wearing masks in his school each day, and that's the friend and the one of the custodians. And the school system has not said anything to the family. So it's just, and I got that feeling in different parts of the state that I visited. I kept wanting to say, hey, y'all, the pandemic is not over, you know, and I've even seen things, you know, we're post COVID, and I'm like, no, we're not. And I think that's one of the things that is, that's even harder for me to understand, how people can just ignore the fact that we now have 1,000 children a day getting sick.
I think it's also part of the reason that people don't see it or feel it if they're not really paying attention to it is because they're not there in the hospitals, and they're not there with the families who have the kids that are sick. For good reason. Like, obviously we don't let like people take pictures in the hospital of people who are suffering in the ICU for privacy issues, but I almost feel like it makes it feel like it's not real to people, that it feels distant, and it feels like a theoretical harm where they're like, but I'm fine. I'm living my life. Like, so why are you trying to scare me out of living my life? In terms of like norms, like societal norms of masking or not masking, one thing that I particularly worry about with our schools is this issue of peer pressure, right? Like, we realize obviously kids, especially in a certain age, are very susceptible to what their friends think and what their friends are doing. And in my kids' school now, well, now it's mandatory masking because our numbers are too high, but generally in my community, people have been more inclined to mask. But my kids went to a camp where like no one was wearing masks. It was really like I walked into the camp to pick them up and they were the only 2 wearing masks. Like, you could see them from a mile away. I was like, oh, look, those 2 kids. And they were fine with it. But I could tell, especially my younger daughter, that she felt weird about it because none of her friends were doing it. And it's like, who wants to be like the weird kid standing out? So even if a parent is encouraging their kid to wear a mask and sending them with a mask, not having it as the norm and not having it as the standard makes it hard for even the kid who's trying to do the right thing to do that, because we understand that the peer pressure and societal pressures are extreme at that age because your friends are your world and you don't want to get teased or bullied about it, right? Like, my older son, who's 12, had a kid at camp asking him, was like, oh, are you wearing a mask because your mom is telling you to, right? And he isn't so fazed by it. I mean, I'm sure he was a little bit fazed by it, but he was like, no, I'm wearing it because I don't want to get sick. And then the other kid was just like, oh, okay. And it was fine, like it wasn't a thing. But it makes it hard, right? Like when the school system can't even agree, and when as adults we can't model the right thing, we make it much harder for our kids to do the right thing. And they're really the ones who are being hung out to dry here, right? Because we can get protected in ways that that kids are not able to. And I feel like it's unfair to put that pressure on them. I'm sure you guys have much more perspective about that.
Yeah. So also we've got one of our people ask a question. And I think this is just a normal thing. Schools trying to force teachers to come in sick. She said she tested negative for COVID, so she does not have COVID, but she does have bronchitis.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still saying, well, you don't have COVID, you need to come to school. And I think we all know that, the big teacher joke is it's easier to just go to school sick than to prepare for a sub. But I think we're seeing that even more now because of COVID, and we've got people out because of COVID, and we don't have subs. That's something we were talking about this time last year, that we wouldn't have people willing to sub. And I think we saw that throughout last year, and I think it's worse this year.
Yeah.
It really is.
I have a lot of sympathy for that story. And I think I've seen that in my own career, especially when I was in medical training, that we would joke, but it wasn't really a joke because it was true. Like I had supervisors who would tell me this. My supervisors were like my attending physicians, that if you are not sick enough to be in the hospital, you should come to work. Right? There's a little bit of that sort of macho culture in medicine. And if you are sick enough to be in the hospital, then you should come to work because you work in a hospital. So I was like, oh, funny jokes. Great story, boss. Anyway, I get it. I've experienced this type of situation in the past. It's a little bit better now, but obviously if you are sick, you should not go to work, period. Right. And I know that there are staffing pressures, and we see this in my line of work also, that one is short staffed, and also one doesn't want to leave their colleagues in the lurch.
Right.
And not have a substitute, and you feel bad, like, what are the kids going to do? What if they can't find someone to take care of them? So you do the best you can, right?
Yeah.
And you're the best judge of your health and the harm you pose to yourself or to other people, right? But no one should feel like they have to go to school or go to work when they're sick, not only just for themselves and protecting their health, but in this moment, protecting the health of others. And we do have to remember that obviously tests are not always foolproof 100%. It depends a little bit on when you test relative to your contact. And these guidelines in different industries are changing all the time in terms of what your return to work algorithm is, especially if you have had COVID, like how many days have to be out, how many days after you test can you come back, these types of things are always in flux, and it's confusing for people, and it's stressful to deal with. But the bottom line of it is, if you are sick, you should not feel like you have to go to work. And that's regardless of COVID. That's just normal talk, right? But I do get that pressure that you get. I mean, I feel it all the time.
One of the things that I wanted to talk about this evening, because the new news today is that they are now approving, for those of us who are vaccinated, a booster 8 months after our second shot, if we got Moderna or Pfizer. They haven't said anything about Johnson & Johnson yet. So are we looking at that? I'm thinking, is this like we're going to be getting every 8 months for a couple of years? We're going to be getting boosters? Is that where we're going, do we think?
So the booster sort of news came out of the White House, and I think that the White House gave this news based on the the CDC sort of newsletter that came out that was looking at some of the data that came from, in particular, Israel, where they've been looking at this issue of what is commonly called breakthrough infections. I would like to change the name of that because we can talk about this, but people who are vaccinated contracting COVID later on down the line, that the immunity wanes or weakens over some time in patients. Right now, the FDA is still looking over that information, and the CDC has a special task force that's going to look that over. That said, I wouldn't be surprised if this, like many of the vaccines we get, that we need sort of a reminder or a re-upping of that shot, just like for our measles vaccines that we got when we were a kid, just like for the tetanus shot that we get, the DTaP, diphtheria, pertussis, all of this series of shots we get that, those of us who are a little closer to having kids that had to do it, we know some shots you have to get twice or 3 times or 4 times, to get to that level of the body remembering and responding. So this is not like so unusual in general. In terms of what it's going to look like for COVID in the future, and if it's going to be like, is this going to be like every year? Is it going to be like the flu shot? I get a lot of people asking me that. I think the answer is we really don't know yet. And that's coming to part of, when we talk about that this is a new disease, everything we're learning is new, right? So I think that there's no real way to predict what it's going to look like a year from now, 2 years from now, if we're going to be doing this every year. But in terms of the third vaccine dose, especially for the subset of people who are immunocompromised, and I want to clarify one thing, because I think that sometimes people get mixed up a little bit in the messaging, because there are certain vaccines, not the COVID vaccine, but other vaccines that use a live virus, like an inactivated or weakened live virus, that people who are immunocompromised or getting chemo or like transplant patients aren't supposed to get, because they might get sick from the vaccine itself because the virus is alive but weakened. That is not the case with the COVID vaccine. I think people sort of mix that up. The reason that we talk about immunocompromised patients with the COVID vaccine is because that their body might not respond to the vaccine as much as someone whose immune system is more robust, right? That they might not make as many antibodies or have the response that we want. So to have those people prioritized early to get a booster dose, I think makes logical sense to me. Obviously, we want to wait for the data, but I think that's probably going to happen. I think we should be pretty liberal with letting people qualify for that booster dose. I've heard a lot of arguments which are not really related to the school system at all, are really, they're sort of more like large philosophical arguments, that we shouldn't be talking about booster doses for adults who have already been vaccinated when so much of the world is unvaccinated. And I get that, because health equity is a focus of mine, and I'm very sensitive to that argument that there are a lot of people who would be killing for even 1 dose of the vaccine while we're talking about our 3rd dose. I don't think this is an either or argument. I don't think we have to talk about like, if I don't take my 3rd dose, it's going to be going to, Bangladesh or something like that. I think we have to talk globally about increasing vaccines overall. I think the United States does have, I think President Biden mentioned, enough doses for all of us to get fully vaccinated, including kids when they become qualified. And that just globally, we have to talk about increasing production in these hard hit and under-resourced countries. So, it's a discussion that I hear a lot, but I don't think it precludes the discussion about many of us, especially those of us who are further out from our vaccine doses. For example, my first vaccine was December 17th. So I've been out for a while, and I'm going to, eagerly look forward to looking over the data and hearing what the CDC and the FDA have to say. But I wouldn't be surprised if this is going to be the norm, just like for many other vaccines that we get. And I've had to get a mumps vaccine. I actually got my mumps titers checked for a position that I had to, had to check all my titers to make sure that I had antibodies. And my mumps wasn't showing up of all the diseases. So I had to get a standalone mumps vaccine, which I guess they make, even though no one has the mumps anymore. But just my body forgot about that one. So it happens. It's not that unusual.
I remember when I was getting ready to go to college, I had to get an extra measles vaccine. And my mom was a nurse, so I know I had all my vaccinations as a young child. But when we sent my shot record, I had to have an extra measles vaccine. So
even like things like the whooping cough, like when I was growing up, we got the whooping cough on a standard schedule, and then it's like, that's it, you're done, you are immune. And then when I was in med school, that was when a study came out that was like, oh, you know what? I think that when you reach young adulthood, before you have a kid, we need to start getting a booster for pertussis. So that's another relatively new booster that we've adopted because, science changes and we learn new things and we adapt based on the new things we know. Because if you don't change your practice based on what you learned, then that's not a real good way to live your life, right? You want to be adaptable. So I think we should just think about it in that way. I think a lot of people see these constantly revised guidelines as like, you guys don't even know what you're doing. Like every day it's different. It's like, no, this is what learning is. Learn, course correct, look at the information, learn again, course correct. That's how you learn to ride a bike, right? Like that's the scientific process. That's the educational process. And I know you all appreciate that.
I have a question. Is there another variant other than Delta? Someone asked me that the other day. Had I heard of this other variant?
Yeah, there are other variants. There's always going to be new variants. And I think that we should realize that there's going to be new ones down the line too. The one that might have been mentioned to you is the Lambda variant, but that I think
Yes.
they're just going down the, the Greek letters. So I don't know
Okay.
if we run out of Greek letters. Maybe we'll just do shapes or colors or something like that. But what other codes do you know? Morse code. Oh, semaphore with the flags. That would be good. But I think that because the Delta variant at this point is so much more contagious, that it's sort of pushing out all the other variants in terms of being concerning. So I don't think that the Lambda variant is something that we're immediately worried about in this moment. But yeah, we're going to hear about other variants. So don't be surprised if we have more letters floating around later in the year. It's just, it seems like this virus is very, able to and prone to mutating. And the first one, I think the Alpha variant, who even remembers talking about that, because we didn't know that there were so many other ones coming down the pike. But
Yeah.
we're already a little bit down the line with Delta.
Okay.
I'm sure Delta Airlines loves it that we just talk about constantly, and it's not in a good way. And they're like, that's different. It's not us.
Doctor, I have a couple of questions for you. One, we talked earlier about vaccinations for those under 12. Is there a generally accepted timeline when that might be available?
The information I've gotten so far, this is obviously not for sure, is that later in the fall, hopefully we will see vaccines available for 5 to 11, which I think is the next age group that it'll be expanded to. There has been a lot of pressure from various medical groups to try to accelerate that, or at least even make like smaller age gaps available, or just to release it on an EUA basis quicker, because like I said, the fact of our kids being uniquely sort of exposed in this moment of peak case rise with a very infectious variant, with school restarting and very patchy, let's be honest, very patchy protection based on where you live and what zip code you live in and what school district you live in, is not a great situation. I would love it if it were available tomorrow. One thing that I worry about, and this worry doesn't outstrip my desire to have it be available quickly, is that the same concerns that people have about vaccinating themselves, I worry that if we roll this out in a way that feels rushed or is not messaged correctly, that we did everything by the book, that parents are going to be hesitant to vaccinate their kids because the same arguments about it came out too fast, So I worry about how we talk about like, get it out, quickly. We know that when the vaccine came out for adults, it wasn't so much that it was rushed, but that many hands make quick work. So many scientists working simultaneously were able to get the data they needed to release this vaccine much more quickly than any vaccine in the history of the world. But it's not because we like skipped steps. It's because a lot of people were working on it. But still, the message that people got were like, this is too soon. Like this just came out like 5 seconds ago. You clearly like push this through. And I worry that people are going to get this message that it didn't go through all the safety checks that it should, even though that's not the case, especially when it comes to children. Because I have definitely talked to people who themselves are vaccinated or even work in the medical field, and they, as adults, have been vaccinated, but they worry about it for their kids because we're always, I am too, like we're very protective of our children, and our job is to protect them and screen out any dangers. And I don't want, I think we have to be very clear in how we message when the vaccine comes out, that it was developed safely, even if it was developed quickly. And that this messaging about like, hurry up, get it out for the kids doesn't mix up with this message that we are being hasty.
The other question I had was just on the booster shot. I haven't read the story that Lisa referred to yet today, and that may answer all my questions, but are you saying that is primarily intended for those who have a compromised autoimmune system, or it's for everyone, or the rollout be prioritized? For someone who's otherwise healthy, should I look forward to the time I can get a third shot?
I think there are two separate stories. So earlier than this newer booster shot story, there was a recommendation that people who are immunocompromised in specific get a third shot because their bodies might not respond to it as strongly as someone with an intact immune system. So that's one thing.
Okay.
And then more recently, I think just in the past day or so, that there was news from the White House. So not yet from the CDC and the FDA, they're still looking at it, right? But from the White House that messaged that most likely they were going to recommend a third shot for everyone.
Okay.
8 months after. So that's a separate piece. I wouldn't
And
be
you
surprised.
expect that?
Yeah.
You expect that this fall also?
They are looking at the data now, but I think that is the goal, that around this fall is when they're going to officially, especially in the first phase, because the first people who got it were people in nursing homes, older people, and healthcare workers. Those are the people who are for sure at this point, probably about 8 months out. So those, I think, will be the first round. But I think generally speaking that White House announcement was that everyone,
Okay.
after the data is fully vetted, is going to be recommended to get a third shot.
Okay, we haven't done a commercial yet. I do need to do a quick commercial. Dr. Al talked about social media, and we've all heard about those echo chambers. But for our members, we have a Rights at Night session next Tuesday night, and I am putting the registration link in the comments about social media and your First Amendment rights and the do's and don'ts, I'm going to say, because we all know that some of our school systems have passed some social media policies that basically say you cannot say anything about your school or your system on social media. Beware. So we're going to talk about that and what we as educators should be knowing, what we should be saying and what we shouldn't be saying, and when and where we should be saying it. So that's our commercial for this evening. That is next Tuesday at 6:30. And I'm looking to see if we have any more questions. We do have someone that said that teachers in her district are saying they don't trust the vaccine. And I think that it's too soon. Or I saw somewhere earlier today where somebody said, well, it's too new. We haven't been giving the vaccine long enough to know if it's really going to work. How do we answer those people?
I totally understand that sentiment. I hear it all the time. I think that's the most common thing I hear from patients or just from people that I encounter, like friends or whoever, about their reluctance to get the vaccine right now. And these are not people, I think that people are often very quick to vilify people who are not vaccinated yet, or paint them with a broad brush, like you're an anti-vaxxer, you're, anti-science. Yeah. And I don't think that's largely the case. And I think that to your credit, like, we do want to be very measured in how we make our health decisions, right? That's what you're supposed to do, right? It doesn't help to be like, you're wrong, just do it, because that doesn't address the question, and it doesn't make you feel more confident in getting the vaccine, right? So what I will say, and what I say to people, is that this vaccine is new, right? We haven't had a COVID-19 vaccine before December of 2020. That is correct. The technology that is behind the vaccine, however, we've been working on for about 2 decades. So what this type of vaccine is, it is a new type of vaccine, right? So you're right in thinking that. And I get it that you want to kind of know more of what's going on. It's called an mRNA vaccine. And what it does is that it gives the body instructions on how to make this piece of this protein that allows us to recognize COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2. But what it basically is that the technology that was already developed was sort of like a 3D printer, right? It's a 3D printer that teaches your body how to crank out whatever we tell it to, right? And what we've told it to crank out, once we gave it the program, once we gave it the data, is like, crank out this piece of protein. Here's what it is. And you program it in, and the 3D printer spits out whatever you want. So the piece that's new is giving it the instructions for the COVID virus, right? And we could plug in, now that we know that it works, that we're like, great, finally, this thing we've been working on for 2 decades works. Now we can think of all the other things we could have it print out, the 3D printer use, right? But the 3D printer technology had already been developed for a long time. So I know that it doesn't necessarily make people feel better because parts of it are new, and you're right to think that, right? Like, I don't want to tell people like, you're wrong, that you're dumb to think that, because it's, you're right to consider this carefully. But a lot of what the technology is has been around for quite a long time. And one of the pieces of proof is that the second, really early in the pandemic, I'm talking like April, right, of the initial wave, that when the Chinese scientists released the genetic sequencing of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, that within really days that we had the vaccine already, because all we needed was that information. Like, what do we tell our 3D printer to print? And once we had that information, we were able to make that vaccine. So all that time since basically April of 2020 was just spent studying the vaccine, studying its safety, studying if it worked. So it's really been being studied for a long time, but the development of the vaccine was fast because we had everything we needed. We just needed that one little piece. So, so if that makes people feel better, it makes me feel better, because like, it's the same thing. Like, I don't want to take my kids to get something that I don't trust, right? Because my job is to protect them. Like, I get it, right? But everything was already there. We just needed the information. We just needed the disk to put into the 3D printer to tell it what to print.
That's a 3D printer. And I think maybe we can, when I think about, so our 3D printers, the new technology, which is a whole lot different than the printer that I remember. Y'all remember the printer that had the holes down the side that went through the printer?
The
And
dot
it took,
matrix printer.
yes.
We actually have this. Traditional vaccines worked a different way, right? Traditional vaccines, like I said, use those either inactivated, like dead pieces of virus, or just like weakened viruses. And we would give the virus, and then the body learns to recognize, like, oh, this is what the virus looks like, right?
Yeah.
That's different. The mRNA vaccines, we deliver this little information piece, right? Like, this is the 3D printer instructions for, like, here's how you make this spike protein, which everyone talks about now. It's just like the outside thing on the, the COVID virus. And we deliver just these instructions, and then the body makes the piece of the protein, and then we learn to recognize just that outside part. So it's different from the classic, it's different from the measles vaccine, right?
Right.
But it works the same on a general principle. It's just, how do we deliver the information for the body to learn to recognize?
So when you get the COVID vaccine, you're not being exposed to COVID. You're being given the tools to treat it without being exposed to it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's the beauty of the vaccine, is that you learn how to recognize the virus without ever having the risk of succumbing to the disease itself, right? And we have old vaccines like like the polio vaccine uses a weakened polio virus. And there were some, quote, breakthrough infections where patients would get polio from the vaccine because the virus was still there and it was weakened, but depending on your body and how it responded to it, it could still possibly infect you. That is not the case with the COVID vaccine, because it only teaches you to make a small piece of the virus, right? It's like if the virus was a car, it only teaches your body how to make pieces of like the steering wheel or the brake. But if you just have a steering wheel or you just have a brake, you're not driving anywhere, right? Like you can't actually do anything. It's just like a little piece, a tiny little piece. So that's another thing that's important for people to know, because I think people worry because sometimes after you get vaccinated, you feel kind of sick, right? You have a lot of the symptoms that people associate with COVID, including like my muscles hurt, I feel really tired, I'm really out of it, I have GI problems. The people like, this gave me COVID because this is what COVID's supposed to be, right? But the vaccine cannot give you COVID because it doesn't make it doesn't make the virus, right? It just makes a little piece.
Cool.
Lisa, I learned something, well, I learned a lot tonight, but I learned something before the call that I did not know, and I think we just saw an example of it, is that Dr. Al is also a cartoonist. I assume those were her original drawings there, but maybe the next time we have Dr. Al on, we can have like a virtual art gallery of some of her cartoonist work.
I don't think that serves anyone well to make you sit through my figures, but yeah, I am a cartoonist, but now I'm using my powers for good, not evil.
Yes.
Good, no evil. Right.
Yes. Okay, y'all. Can't believe it, but an hour has flown by. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you, Dr. Al. And we will, I will encourage those of you that are watching, if you have colleagues, if you have friends, if you have family members that have questions, please share this with them so that we can protect our children. I'm going to say again what I've said every time. None of us, no one wants to be in our classrooms with our students more than educators, but we have to keep ourselves, our families, our colleagues, and most importantly, our students safe. And unfortunately, we're seeing what we feared last year with the cases going up in the schools and school opening and closing and everything changing. It's happening this year, and we don't want that to continue. So please, if you're eligible, get vaccinated, wear your mask in your schools, social distance. I know that says as much as possible. Wash your hands. Don't go to school if you're sick. If you're a parent, please keep your child home if they're sick, and let's make it through this and not lose any more of our children. So thank you for joining us this evening, and we will see you on the first Wednesday in September.
Thanks, everyone.